Okay. Hello, everybody. How you guys doing? My name is Mark. This is Why I Hate the World. What's happening? So this week we have an extra super special stream for you all because we're going to be talking about book burning. Specifically, we're talking about education and the conservative war on education, which is really not a new thing. That's been something that has pretty much been a thing for at least 40 years, probably longer. You know, pretty much as long as I can remember, there was always a conservative predilection to basically control education and the subjects that are being taught therein. Pony Throat, hey, thank you for joining. Appreciate it. Um, Before we jump headlong into that, though, let's take a look at what we're working on. So this is our Demon Head guy coming back to this. Um, it's coming along, you know. I think I might go in here in his throat and mouth area and remove some of the detail. Might be a little too much. I'm liking more of what's over here on the left, you know, because there needs to be a little bit of open space there because we're gonna color this afterwards. I'm gonna actually go in and make this a full-on illustration. So I think it might be a little too busy through the mouth, you know, through the mouth and neck. We might maybe later, not in this stream, but maybe later we might go in and remove some of that, maybe simplify that a little bit. Anyway, let's jump right into it. So, um, remember a few months ago how the conservatives lost their fucking minds over critical race theory? And this was just all over the place. It was in all over Fox and every like talking head pundit wannabe fucking Rush Limbaugh person was losing their mind over it. And yeah, that never kind of really went away. You know, it's still going on. That culture war, right? And the reason why is because conservatives and Republicans really don't have anything of substance to run on, right? So we're coming close. We're coming up on the midterms, right? And yeah, seems like we're always in an election, doesn't it? I mean, that's kind of like annoying as fuck, but that's just, that's democracy, right? Constantly in a fucking election. And they really don't have much, right? They just got, we just got through with like the possibly the worst presidential like administration of all time with Donald Trump that literally ended with a coup attempt, right? They don't have anything in the way of policy, right? There's a lot of like problems still in the country. I mean, we still have a pandemic. We have the economy, which is shitty, right? We have like, we're on the brink of World War III in fucking the Ukraine and all this other shit. The Republicans don't have any answers to these. They don't even like they're not even really trying to come up with any answers in order to address any of these issues. Everything from the environment to wages you know, to national security and whatever. I mean, shit. Tucker Carlson did a segment on how we should be on Russia's side, right? You know, that was, I mean, for the Ukraine, it's like, oh, there's their fucking solution. Their solution is just let it happen, right? Which really, is kind of something I've said many times in many streams in the past that they don't have solutions. Their solutions to any of these problems is to literally do nothing. That's their solution, right? So, but they gotta run on something. They need something in order to, excite their base, and they need a boogeyman, right? Because this is how conservatives think. Conservatives are motivated by fear. You know, they're not. It seems more like progressives and to some extent liberals are motivated more on what we can accomplish, right? Idealism, right? We have a goal in mind, we want to do it. Whether your goal is, racial equality, or whether it's economic equality, or whether it's a clean environment, whatever. We have things that we want to do, things that we want to accomplish, and we're not afraid to use the government to, try to enact these policies. You know, Conservatives aren't like that. They don't have shit that they want to accomplish. They want to keep everything exactly how it is, and even more so, go back to how it used to be back in some imaginary fucking time in the 50s or some shit when everything was supposedly perfect. That's kind of one of the hallmarks of fascism, right? Where you have this like imaginary period in the past where like everything was great. Like you're trying to recapture the you know, um, golden age, some supposed golden age, which in real life never really existed. I mean, things were just as shitty in the 50s as they were today, right? And even more so in a lot of areas, when it comes to things like racial inequality and that kind of thing. Yeah, maybe people had higher wages if you were white, you know, and you were lucky enough to be middle class, but even poor white people back then like had fucking nothing. But anyway, that's a description for, a discussion for another time. But anyway, so their boogeyman this time around is critical race theory, right? Um, which, to that end, multiple states over the last year have passed laws that have basically centered around banning what they think is critical race theory, right? Laws that are restricting what teachers can and can't teach, what kind of discussions they can and can't have in the classroom, that kind of thing. And it's, subjects that have been deemed to be too offensive to conservatives, right? And these bills they kind of hide behind this facade of promoting equality, right? One like, language that you'll always see in these bills is always something like, oh, we're, banning any teaching of one race being superior to another, for example. This is the kind of language you'll see in these types of bills that you see in Texas or in wrong one. I keep clicking that by accident. See, I will get used to this, but anyway, like that's the kind of language you'll see. Like if you go to like Texas or something, they'll say, yeah, we're preventing one race from being taught to be superior to another or something like that. And on the surface, that sounds like it's promoting racial equality, right? But in real life, it's just a facade. And in reality, the intent of these bills and these laws is to cover up the realities of inequality in the United States. And basically, through preventing any kind of education about the history of civil rights, civil liberties, racial and sexual oppression of any kind, you know. And so, this is why these are targeting certain subjects, things like civil rights, like teaching about slavery, how slavery relates to the Civil War, right? The history of slavery in the United States, history of lynching, stuff like that, right? And things like redlining, institutional um, racism and sexism and that kind of thing. Like any types of discussions on those things is what is being basically outlawed by these bills, right? And the end goal of all this is to produce a generation of young people who have no context of any of these subjects, who don't know anything about these subjects, and that way they are more likely to vote conservative. That's what it is. This is, it's basically another front in the culture war, right? you know because what happens when you don't know anything? When you don't know anything, you believe what people tell you, right? So if you're not educated on these subjects, if you don't know about, say, for example, the causes of the Civil War, right, or the abolitionist movement, or things like the Dred Scott decision, right, or that that kind of thing, if you don't know about these types of things, then you're more likely to believe it when Tucker Carlson goes on TV and tells you that, the United States doesn't have a history of racism, right? You're more likely to believe that. You're more likely to vote for somebody like Lindsey Graham or whatever, and you're more likely to vote against a Democrat or a progressive, right? If you think that they're being anti-American by talking about things like slavery, right? Or you're more likely to support policies that take away things like affirmative action, or that sort of thing, or support like tough on crime legislation that unfairly targets minorities. And this is what they want. This is what they want because and the thing is, it's not really a new thing. This is education has always been sort of a target of conservatives. Like I said, going back decades, you have this sort of stereotype on the right about liberal college professors, right? You ever heard this? I know that you guys have heard this stereotype. There's this idea that all of the colleges out there are just sort of like overrun with like, you know, liberal commie atheists, right? Who and then if you're, and your kid will go to college and he'll be like, young and God-fearing. And then when he comes out of college, they've turned him into like a, pink-haired trans communist who's like ready to fucking like, take over the country for the, in the name of fucking like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or something. You know what I'm talking about, right? This is definitely like a stereotype, and it's a stereotype which is very, very old. I mean, I don't think I can ever remember myself personally a time when that stereotype didn't exist, and I'm pretty sure it goes back at least 20 or 30 years before I was born, right? I haven't really investigated that far, but I'm pretty sure if I were to go back and look at magazines and shit from like the 1950s, you'd probably find, conservative columnists and stuff bitching and moaning about how colleges are all, liberal now, right? No doubt at all. I mean, I think it probably has that root, the roots of this probably go all the way back to like the fucking McCarthy era, but I don't know. That's something that, would be interesting to research that, right? Um, so, but that's the idea. This idea that, of the evil liberal college professor and that colleges are just like basically little sort of communist and like indoctrination camps, and that anybody who dares to be a conservative in a college environment faces the risk of being like, blacklisted and fired. And then nowadays but instead of being fired nowadays, they'll say canceled. Like used to be back in the 90s, you would just get fired or whatever. And now it's, now they say canceled because cancel culture is the next big fucking boogeyman as well. Right. And I want to, as an example of this, right, I want to present to you the just filling in story. Okay, so let me open up the just filling in story. And let's move this over here. And I want to turn on my laptop window. This is the just filling in story. So let me go ahead and put this down in the chat for you guys. I want to read this to you because this is the kind of thing that we would see for literally decades. So before the internet became a tool of the right wing to, destroy democracy with, they used to do things like chain letters, right? Way back in the day. Chain letters were basically somebody would write a letter, send it to somebody, and they would say, send this letter to 20 people, right? And a lot of the times there would be scams and shit like that that had to do with chain letters, right? And but this chain letters used to be a thing back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and specifically churches would use them in order to organize people, right? And also people would spread conspiracy theories through them as well. Like there'd be guys sending chain letters about like fucking the New World Order or how there's fluoride in your water or something. But they were definitely also like you would get on a list and then people would send like religious affirmations through chain letters, right? That continued into the internet era. Then you started getting chain emails. That was the thing you saw in the latter half in the 90s started happening. You get these chain emails and they would be like, stories like this. These types of things are now passed around on Facebook, right? So just to kind of illustrates that, what we're seeing now, with people being indoctrinated on Facebook and stuff was always kind of there in the background. It was just much more muted because before, if you wanted to send a message to somebody, you had to go out and actually type up 50 or 60 letters, and you had to have 50 or 60 like addresses, and you had to get 50 or 60 envelopes and stamps and shit and send it out. It wasn't that easy. And now you can just like have, 25,000 Facebook friends, right? Who come to your channel to, come to your Facebook, page every day to get their daily dose of 2 minutes hate going for evil, stinking, tree hugging liberals or whatever. And all you got to do is make one post and then you hit all of them. And it's like, right. So it's the same kind of shit that we're seeing was always a thing. It was just much less like prevalent because of physical barriers like that. And now it's like, that's why it's so fucking widespread, right? Nowadays, because the internet makes instant communication possible. But here's one and there's a variation. This has been something that I've seen multiple times throughout the years. This is the just filling in story. So I want to read this to you guys, right? Okay. A Marine was taking college classes between his deployments to Afghanistan. One of the courses had a professor that was an atheist and a member of the ACLU, right? This is already bullshit. Okay. But let's continue. One day, the professor shocked everyone by walking into class, looking up, and stating, God, if you are real, I want you to come down and knock me off this platform. I will give you 15 minutes. Right? Several minutes ticked by in silence. When the 15 minutes almost expired, the Marine got up from his seat, approached the professor, and punched him in the face, knocking him off the platform and out cold. The Marine simply went back to his seat. The professor came to, visibly shaken, and asked the Marine, "What the heck did you do that for?" The Marine said, God was busy protecting protecting America's military, who are out protecting your right to say stupid shit like that, so he sent me to fill in. Yeah, not a true story at all in the slightest. It is complete bullshit, obviously. Nobody would, first off, like, it just didn't happen. Okay, there's no possible way that this is even close to being something that could possibly be real, you know. Um, but anyway, you would see, let's turn this fucking stupid shit off, all right? You would see shit like this all the time, right? In, chain letters like that, and now on Facebook posts. These phony baloney made up stories, right? You also get like pastors and shit saying stuff like this. These little sort of antidotes, and basically what they are, they're affirmations, is what they are. They're like, look how strong my faith is, and shit like this. You know, if you ever watch like or listen to like religious radio, you hear stories like the constant stories like this. It's basically they're this bullshit little stories that people make up in order to like circle jerk each other into, showing how much fucking they, want to fillet Jesus. It's baloney. But anyway, but that just kind of illustrates, right, that the war on education is not a new thing. It's basically literally something that these people have been like fucking like, circle jerking themselves with for decades and decades and decades, right? And it's kind of gone into overdrive over the last year and a half. It's really kind of gone bananas. It was always sort of there. You always had kind of these, you'd get crazy people showing up to um, school board meetings and shit like that always in the past and screaming and yelling whenever something bad would happen. Harry Potter comes out and then, the conservatives show up and, Harry Potter is fucking Satan worship or whatever. And they did the same thing when Star Wars happened, and they did the same thing with like, I mean, and then I'm sure you saw like back in the civil rights era, the same fucking thing, right? So what caused it to go bananas? Why are there like, because now you're seeing these videos of people screaming and going crazy, like at school board meetings specifically, and now they're passing all these laws trying to restrict things that people can teach and all of this shit. What the hell happened, right? Well, there's kind of a confluence of reasons. First off, first thing that happened is um, the pandemic, right? Pandemic is driving people crazy. You're seeing all of these, this pushback against mask mandates, against, um, vaccinations, that kind of thing. And admittedly, we should maybe do a stream on this. The anti-vaccination, the anti-vax thing, the anti-mask thing, is something that actually started on the left. It was always kind of like there was always this sort of like natural medicine thing that went through the leftist circles, where they didn't trust big pharma, blah 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 blah. And it might be worth doing a stream on where anti-vaxxers came from in the first place, right? There's a studies in the 90s, autism, shit like that. But it has been kind of firmly taken over by the right wing and politicized by the right wing. And so this is one thing that they really fucking hate. They really don't want kids to wear masks and stuff like that. And that's become kind of a symbol for in like the sort of wacky QAnon type circles, the wearing masks and vaccine mandates in schools has become like one of the hills to die on, you know, because they see it as sort of like a communist takeover of the school, right? The idea that it's like, well, you're going to force me to put something in my body that I don't want, or you're going to force my child to like wear a mask for 8 hours a day, because fucking, you know, in order to stop him from spreading a fucking like easily preventable disease. But the way they frame it as a way of freedoms. Like, I'm not wearing any, like this. It's sort of always kind of amazed me how conservatives like will say some shit like, wearing a mask, like safety precautions, like are tyranny. They always saw the same kind of thing, like when seatbelt laws became a thing, or when helmet laws in California, like if you ride a motorcycle, you have to wear a helmet. That's the law. You'll straight get a ticket, just like a seatbelt. People lost their minds over that too. It's like I have the right to bash my brains out with a motorcycle crash and get paralyzed if I feel like it, you know, that kind of thing. And it's a little bit different when it's a pandemic because it's not just you protecting yourself. Nobody gives a shit if you yourself personally get sick and die, but they care more about, you spreading the disease to other people and some people who can't get vaccinated because they're immunocompromised and doctor says not to get vaccinated and they rely on you to fucking not spread the shit to them. So that's just one thing that has kind of like driven them over the edge. Another thing that's really done it though is basically there's been a lot of I guess you would say social progress in the last few years in regards to things like first off in particular with gay like LGBTQ rights. There's been a little bit of progress, and maybe since the last maybe 5 years, right? Things like people asserting gender pronouns and stuff like that, right? And it's been a big. This is sort of like a backlash to that. This push to say have gender neutral bathrooms in public schools, right? They really don't like that. They really do not like the idea of gender neutral bathrooms, right? Or schools like encouraging people to use gender neutral pronouns when like the student wants it. they really hate that idea too. You're seeing like um, there's constant like fucking videos from people like Ben Shapiro and Tim Pool and all these other fucking, and Jordan Peterson and shit talking about that. Even today, like, 3, 4 years later, after all this, you'd think all this shit would be like settled by now, but it's not. They're still sort of milking that cow and spreading that, you know, um, bigoted fear against trans people for this, right? Another one that they really can't stand, they really, really hate is allowing trans students to participate in sports, right? They really, really can't stand that. And in particular, trans women and girls participating in sports. Like they don't seem to give a shit about like trans boys participating in sports. It's only trans women and girls, they really fucking can't stand that. And there's all this controversy, Joe Rogan and shit, people talking about this stuff and how it's like fucking, men invading women's spaces and all this other bullshit, right? So this is kind of another one of the fronts in this little um, in this iteration of the culture war, right? They see they see that LGBTQ rights as like basically communist indoctrination, right? And that's the way they see it. And so that's another thing that's really kind of really kicked this into overdrive. And then one other subject that is kind of spurned this like reaction from them, of course, was Black Lives Matter, right? Black Lives Matter, we should never forget how much Black Lives Matter really scared the living shit out of white America, right? About the it really scared the people that are in the live in the suburbs who basically did not, have did not live anywhere close to the where the actual protests happened. You know, you because they've effectively, like, the right wing has effectively smeared the BLM movement into basically calling them a bunch of terrorists. Right. That's what it is. And so you'll hear constantly over and over and over things like, oh, BLM burned down entire cities and all this other crap. And it's like, no, they didn't. They didn't fucking burn down the entire city. Like, yeah, some places there were violence, but it was sort of like something like 3% of all of the BLM protests had any kind of violence at all whatsoever, right? And out of like, so I mean, like 97% of them were peaceful, you know, and then it's sort of like we can't forget that there were things like agent provocateurs and shit, right? We've done several streams on that, so the fact that it's sort of undeniable that those people had a hand in it as well. And yet, you have to also speak the truth, though. There also was a lot of looting and rioting and stuff like that, right? But that's a lot different than an entire city being burned down. It's like, no, there were no entire cities which were burned down. That's bullshit, right? And how many people has BLM murdered? You know, zero, right? There were zero instances of BLM, like, crowds of Black Lives Matters people going and like lynching people, shit like that, or beating up cops and killing them and that kind of thing. No, it was overwhelmingly a peaceful movement. And, kind of still is, although it's petered out a little bit, but it's not like Black Lives Matter has gone away, right? It's just, it's not as active as it was 2 or 3 years ago, right? Right. Related to that was the 1619 Project. That was another thing that has driven the conservatives nuts. They really don't like that, right? So what even is that though, right? Because you hear a lot about the 1619 Project and like, what the fuck? Like, and they even still talk about this today. I mean, this is the 1619 Project was started, like 3 years ago, and it's still fucking being talked about. They're because they're basically trying to keep the boogeyman going until the election. That's why, until the midterms. So 1619 Project was basically a series of articles in the New York Times and the New York Times Magazine. I guess you would say long form journalism, right? by several different authors. Some of them were like Pulitzer Prize winning authors, so these were not just like hacks that didn't do any research and were spreading SJW lies or whatever. These are like actual real journalists who are like fucking award-winning journalists and shit. And the whole thing with the 1619 Project was basically telling American history from the perspective of black people, is basically it. The 1619 was the 500th year anniversary of Africans being brought over to um, British America, I guess you'd say. So there were already like African Americans and slaves and stuff like that in the Americas, like going all the way back to like the year 1500. But like this was like the anniversary, like the 400-year anniversary of them being imported into British America, which is North America, the United States, right? Not North America specifically, but the United States. Um, and so that's where it came from, right? That's where the name 1619 came from, right? And it's I mean, obviously I haven't read all of it, but I mean, I've read a few of the articles and stuff, and it's history. It's basically what it is. It's just reframing American history through the lens of the African American experience, specifically slavery, right? Like it's focusing a lot on slavery and the history of slavery and the modern day ramifications of slavery that are still being felt today, stuff like that, right? And the conservatives really went crazy over that. It became another sort of boogeyman for them to, fucking rile people up for their 2 minutes hate. You know what I mean? Like very similar. It was very similar to the way that like say Gamergate or like Comicsgate or something like that happened, where you just got these conservative right wing comment like content creators who would just make like video after video and article after article and constantly every fucking day, right? And even when there would be no news to report, they would just make a video anyway with a clickbaity title. Because this shit, we have to remember this outrage posting, like the if you guys saw my stream on outrage posting, that's kind of their business model of how these people make money, how people like Tim Pool and Alex Jones and people like that and Tucker Carlson even. This is how they make money. They make money through fear and through outrage. And this is another thing that people, get outraged over, and it's very effective. It's driving the conservatives nuts, right? And when people get angry, they fucking tune in, right? And this is what so that's what it became. It became just this like, this cottage industry of people posting like anti fucking 1619 content, right? And it got pretty far, it got pretty crazy, right? Um, they started passing laws in certain states about like, we're not going to like fucking um allow schools to teach any of this, right? Because it actually was, there were some school districts that were using it as supplemental material, right? To sort of like, because these are like Pulitzer Prize winning authors and shit. So, you know, with and schools around the country, school districts around the country are hard up for cash as it is, right? Mainly because conservatives don't want to like fund education, right? So, teachers have to buy their own supplies and shit like that, right? So, like, when the New York Times shows up and says, hey, we'll give you 400 copies of this magazine or whatever to use however you want, teachers jump on that and they go, yeah, you know, and so that was like, for example, in Chicago, there were a couple of schools in Chicago that sort of worked some of these articles and things into their curriculums, like kids doing book reports on them and shit, right? And the conservatives lost their minds. They went absolutely fucking crazy. Ted Cruz, came out against it and started talking a bunch of shit. Donald Trump um, there's a quote from Donald Trump about the 1619 Project. Right? I'm gonna read the entire quote. This is Donald. This is our former president, Donald Trump. Right? I will read this quote to you, just so that we don't forget what a such a coherent and accomplished elder statesman Donald Trump actually was. Here was his speech on the 1619 Project. I just I look at school, I watch, I read, look at the stuff. Now they want to change. 1492, Columbus discovered America. We grew up. You grew up. We did. We all did. That's what we learned. Now they want to make it the 1619 Project. Where did that come from? What does it represent? I don't even know. That was Donald Trump. It's pretty obvious that yes, he doesn't even know what the 1619 Project even is. It's pretty obvious that he was just saying that because somebody told him to say that, because he probably saw it on Fox News when he was watching TV instead of doing his fucking job as president. That Donald Trump had like every day, they called it executive time. He like basically from fucking he would just work like maybe like 4 hours in the morning, and then by like 2 o'clock, like they called it executive time, and that was basically what he did. He just watched fucking TV all day. Right? That's true shit. I'm not making that up. You know, if I'm lying, Donald Trump can sue me. Go for it. I'll fucking win because the shit's true. Um, yeah, so pretty obvious that he didn't even fucking know, but that didn't stop Donald Trump from threatening California schools from teaching anything that had to do with the 1619 Project, and by claiming to that if they did, he was going to cut their funding. Specifically, he focused on California, right? As far as I could tell, after a couple of minutes of googling, I don't think that there ever was a plan for any school district in California to actually teach anything that has to do with the 1619 Project. But for some reason, he chose to pick on California, not Chicago, where it actually was being taught. Whatever. Kind of goes, the conservatives really like to pick on California for some reason. California is like a big boogeyman to them. And I've been thinking of doing a stream on that too. It's sort of like a stereotype in and of itself now at this point, where they just think California is like fucking, like Ben Shapiro said in the last stream we did. California is, there's monsters running around and there's piles of garbage everywhere. It's sort of become like this sort of meme in conservative circles to insult California. In real life, it's because California is awesome. That's why they don't like it. It's because California is an example of how the system can work. California is in the red. California has high taxes and shit like that, yes, but it has a very high standard of living, and it's not in debt. It's not a failed state like, say, Kentucky or Tennessee is, right? It is a great example of how democracy and how government can actually work when you have decent policies, right? And, raise fucking taxes. That's an example. That's why they hate California so much, because it's not what they claim. It's not like a fucking hellhole where there's human shit in the streets and things like that. No. There's problems in California. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of homeless people. There's a lot of, stuff like that. There's crime, that kind of thing. It's not perfect by any fucking stretch of the imagination, but it is functional and is actually getting a lot better since like the fucking Republicans aren't in charge. Anyway, so this has led to a lot of states which have. I need to get me some water. Excuse me for a second. Where's my drink? I did bring a drink in here, did I not? Shit, because I can't be going on here. Ah, there it is. All right. So this has led to a lot of states which have passed laws to ban critical race theory, right? Those being, at least what they think is critical race theory, because it's not actually critical race theory. You know, like we said, critical race theory is actually, a subject that's taught at the post college level. What do you call that? Collegiate, I think is what that's called. It's actually like a subject that you teach in law school, and it has to, critical race theory really has to do with how like laws and race, like race and sex and gender intersect, and how discrimination on those things are expressed through laws. So it'll be things like in critical race theory courses, in law school, you'll learn about stuff like say for example disparities in criminal sentencing, right? So like a good example of that would be the law that people like for say powder, like the sentence that you would get for having a certain amount of crack cocaine versus the same amount of powder cocaine. And like one of them, you'll get like 5 years, and then like the other one you'll get fucking 25. And it's like, why? And the reason why is because, black people are more likely to have crack, and white people are more likely to have powder coke, powder cocaine. That's why, right? And it's an example of racial disparity in sentencing. Or another example of that would be just how black people in general and minorities tend to just get harsher sentences for the exact same crime. There was a video Rachel Maddow did a little while ago, actually, which was pretty actually something that is worth spreading around. I'm gonna see if I can find the link to it. But it was a story of a woman who basically went to prison for 6 years for attempting to register to vote, right? Let me see. I think I wrote it down here. Yeah, here it is. Her name was Pam P. Moses in Memphis, Tennessee, right? And the story of Pam P. Moses is definitely worth sharing. She basically was a felon, and then she tried to get her right to vote reinstated because in Tennessee felons can't vote, right? And but after you get off of probation, then you can petition to get your right to vote back, and this is what Pam Moses did. And then she actually got like a certificate from the state saying everything was cool, and she was allowed to vote, right? But then they like said, "Oh, that was a mistake. You can't vote." And then she got arrested for even trying to register to vote. And apparently the judge, even though she had a certificate from the state, she went and like double checked with them, with her parole officers and all that stuff, and got all the proper paperwork and all that stuff. And the judge basically said she tricked them into giving her the certification that she was allowed to vote. And it was like she got fucking 6 years, and Pam Moses is still in prison right here, and really kind of hoping that that gets overturned at a higher court. That sounds like something that is most definitely going to get overturned in a higher court, but still, Pam P. Moses is in prison and is like, her life is like basically fucked right now because, you know, she tried to get her rights back reinstated and went through the proper channels, right? And then in the same video, it's actually really kind of good. In the same video, Rachel Maddow goes on and lists like five other people who actually did vote illegally, who happen to be all Republicans and all get basically slaps on the wrists. One guy like got probation, another guy served 3 days in prison, and it was like, or in jail, shit like that. And it was because, what's the difference? Well, these were all white men who basically actually did engage in voter fraud, white Republicans who actually like did cast votes and shit like that, who like get slaps on the wrist. But when a black woman does it, she goes to fucking jail for 6 years, and that's an example right there of something that critical race theory would discuss and try to suss out the reasons why. Why is that happening, right? It's obviously some form of discrimination, but why? And other places in the other types of laws like that, things like redlining and that kind of thing, right? Discrimination in the workplace and stuff like that. That's what actual critical race theory actually is, right? critical race theory is not something that is taught in K through 12, right? They don't teach those types of subjects in grade school or even high school, right? Or even really college, really. It's mainly, like I said, in like law school, right? So what, the thing is, conservatives think critical race theory is basically anything that has to do with race whatsoever. And they've kind of effectively demonized it into this sort of anti-white hate campaign, which is complete and total bullshit, has nothing to do with that whatsoever, right? It's total bullshit. But this is what the right-wing political pundits have turned it into. They've turned it into see the evil commies and Black Lives Matter and stuff are taking away your rights, and they're all like these, they basically, that's what they turned it into, an anti-white hate campaign, which is like has no fucking basis in reality. But this is what they're banning. So this is what all of the laws are banning, um, that have been passed, and they've been passed in a lot of different states so far. We've got bans in Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Arizona, and North Dakota. Those have all passed laws that, in one way or another, are um, designed to limit the teaching of critical race theory. Most of them will not say critical race theory in the law. There are actually, I think, are two of them that do, right? But it's mainly there'll be laws that'll say shit like, yeah, there will be no discussions of one race being superior to another, blah 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 blah, shit like that, right? Um, and what does that actually do, right? Um, it basically has a chilling effect. It will prevent teachers from basically teaching about any kind of racial discrimination or the history of racial discrimination or anything like that at all, right? And that's what's actually happening. This is what we're really seeing all around the country, right? um, in many states, and they all just happen to be red states. It's just funny how that always works out. What do we say here? School boards in Florida, Georgia, Utah, and Alabama have introduced guidelines to reduce it. The actual laws have been passed in Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Arizona, North Dakota. Arizona's law was overturned by the Arizona Supreme Court, but I don't know. I think the shit still counts, right? And this is like, the message is clear. It's like basically, hey teachers, you're going to teach what we want, and if you don't, then we're going to have you arrested. You know, it's no coincidence that this is happening at the same time that there are insane people showing up at school boards threatening them with violence if their kids wear masks. That's no coincidence, right? It's all part of kind of the same plan. This is basically fascist takeover of the United States, right? This is what it is. They lost on a national level. They tried to take over the government and they lost. So now what they're doing is they're going through their own communities. And like what's one thing that is, the one thing that's very vulnerable in every community is education, because especially in these small towns where most of these little towns where this shit is happening, they don't really have much of a tax base, right? So if you get a bunch of angry parents, like um, threatening to sue and shit like that over perceived wrongs, well, the school doesn't have any money because well, most schools are funded through property taxes, and most of the little towns where this kind of shit is happening, they don't really collect much in the way of property taxes anyway. You know what I'm saying? And so the school is more likely just to capitulate because they just simply don't have the money to defend themselves, right? This has always kind of been, for decades, this has sort of been the attack pattern from conservatives, right? They would always go to, whenever they wanted to say censor something, you know, or when they would try to like teach evolution in schools, that kind of thing. They would always find some little backwater town someplace in Kentucky or some shit that like didn't have the resources to fight back. And then they would have, then they would pour millions of dollars into a campaign in order to get, like, say, evolution taught as, or creationism taught in science classes, shit like that. They're just doing the same thing now, but with critical race theory, right? It's kind of fucked up, you know. At the federal level, there's been a little bit of movement on this, but nothing has been passed, obviously, because it can't get through the House. Um, Senator Tom Cotton proposed a bill called the Saving American History Act of 2020, which went nowhere, right? But still, the attempt was made. Um, this bill prohibited K through 12 schools from using federal funds to teach curriculum related to the 1619 project, right? Specifically to that. See, this kind of shows how much, like, how scared they were that we're gonna try to pass a law like over, the entire, like, at the federal level to stop like one specific like journalism project. It's fucking blown away. Blows me away, man. You know, Basically, this law said that any school that does will be ineligible for federal funds. You know, Federal professional development grants. So, the Fed, so lots of schools around the country in one way or another get a little bit of money from the federal government. So it's can actually be an effective hammer there. You know what I mean? Oh, we're gonna take your money away if you don't do what we fucking say. You know, Imagine, you know, some even really huge school districts like the Los Angeles, school district. It's gigantic. It has a budget in the millions, right? Even something like that would basically have to bow to that because they get a significant amount of their money from the Fed, right? So, Tom Cotton said, here's a quote from him. The 1619 Project is a racially diversive and revolutionist account of history that threatens the integrity of the Union by denying the true principles on which it was founded, right? The true principles of which the United States was founded. Well, what are those true principles exactly, Because I seem to remember that when the United States was founded, there was a thing called the Three-Fifths Compromise, right? This is in the actual Constitution, right? The Constitution is the founding document of the United States, is it not? Right? There was no United States before the Constitution was written and ratified. Correct? Yes. Yes, I am correct. That is correct. Right. In the Constitution, it actually says that if you are a slave, then you are not a full person. That you are, for the purposes of the census, three-fifths of a person. This was a compromise made specifically so that slave states would join the Union. Okay. So, here's the thing. The option was there to start the United States without these slave states, right? It probably would have failed. The United States as a country, as an endeavor, would have failed without the slave states. But that was an option, right? They made this compromise on purpose specifically to keep slaves in there because they needed the slave states, right? So let's not, but let's not bullshit what that actually says. It actually says that, people who were, slaves, in this case, all of the slaves were African American, right? Because they were. Okay, there really wasn't much in the way of Native American slaves. They usually just murdered Native Americans and didn't try to keep them as slaves. They usually just exterminated them, you know, gave them blankets full of smallpox and shit like that, and just killed them and took their land. You know, they really weren't interested in making slaves out of Native Americans. They were more interested in just killing Native Americans. Although I'm sure there probably were Native American slaves. Don't get me wrong there. I'm not claiming that there weren't, but the slavery in the South was from Africa. It was the the Atlantic slave trade, the triangle trade, right? Where they would trade rum for slaves and then shit like that, right? I mean, we all learned about that in eighth grade or whatever. Um, and yeah, that was one of the founding documents. Another decision. that our country was essentially founded on, the Dred Scott decision, right? That came a few years later in 1857, I think. But a little reminder for people out there who, don't remember, Dred Scott was basically a slave who, when his master died, sued to be, set free, right? And apparently there was a promise that, like at one time, they lived in Missouri, and then one time they went to Wisconsin, and Dred Scott's master basically promised him that when I die, you're going to be set free. And then, you know, it happens. And then Dred Scott's like wife didn't want to do it, right? And so he tried to sue to be free. And it had, and it ended up like dragging in lots of things about because there was another like the Missouri Compromise, right, back then, which was like basically said that Missouri would be added as a slave state, and then I think another state was going to be added as a free state in order to keep the number of free states and slave states even, some shit like that. And this went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically said that nope, Dred Scott was not a citizen, that anybody who was formerly a slave could not be a United States citizen. And the Chief Justice in that case, his name was Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, Taney, Taney. Basically, yeah, he ruled. He said that slaves and their descendants were never meant to be considered citizens under the Constitution. So, not just actual slaves, not just people who were enslaved, but and their descendants were never supposed to be citizens. This is the Supreme Court of the United States. Yeah, granted, this was 160 years ago and shit. But, so let's not pretend, right, that the United States doesn't have a history of oppression, right? Let's not pretend that it wasn't founded on systems which oppressed people because of their ancestry and the color of their skin, right? Because it did. So when Tom Cotton gets up there and says that the 1619 Project denies the true principles on which the country was founded and it's threatening the unity. No, no, fuck you, Tom Cotton. You are 100% wrong. Suck my dick. That's bullshit, you know? And we need to push back on shit like that, right? We need to push back on this. This is why it's important, man. It's important, and the thing that you'll hear from people, like you'll hear from conservatives, is like, oh, well, you hate America because you like, say shit like this because you want to teach this aspect of history. You just hate America. Can't we all like look past this and move past all this and just be like, citizens together and blah 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 blah, right? You know, you keep creating divisiveness by bringing this up. This is shit that you'll hear, and it's like, well, no, it's only divisive because you have a problem with it, right? It doesn't mean, if you teach the truth. You can't hate America by teaching the truth, right? That's kind of like somebody like in Germany saying, "Oh, you hate Germany because you're teaching, about Nazis in World War II and like, the fucking fascist takeover of our country." It's like, no, man. That doesn't mean that you hate the country. It means you're fucking acknowledging reality. You know, you have to teach what actually happened, especially the bad parts, right? So that way the bad things don't get repeated, you know? And this is kind of what the conservatives are basically doing the exact opposite of that. They're trying to whitewash history, literally whitewash it. Like there's like no better word to describe what they're doing better than whitewashing, right? And trying to gaslight the public and an entire generation of children into thinking that basically the American bullshit like story was true, that this is the land of the free and the streets are paved with gold and George Washington chopped down the cherry tree and all this other bullshit. That sort of, they want like that, they want to instill that sort of myth, like that myth, the American myth of the land of opportunity and freedom and pilgrims and shit like that. And it's like, No, it really wasn't free, not for everybody, you know. And really acknowledging this actual real history will, this is how the country heals, right? If we can acknowledge this history, right, maybe we won't have things like, say, BLM protests anymore, because maybe our society will actually do something to address these inequities and they won't have to protest, right? Maybe we won't have things like Kyle Rittenhouse, you know, going in and shooting people, right? Maybe we won't have like something like Ahmaud Arbery. You remember the Ahmaud Arbery case, right? Guy was basically jogging down the street, minding his business. Three fucking dudes in a truck show up. One guy's filming it, basically fucking like try to like, arrest him and shit. Three guys who were not police officers show up, fucking end up blowing him away. Luckily, unlike the Rittenhouse case, those guys actually got like, convicted and are now serving life in fucking prison. So good for him. But in the meantime, this person's dead now. Maybe this shit wouldn't happen if we acknowledged and actually taught the real fucking history, right? Maybe those three guys wouldn't have said, hey, this dude is just like, automatically thought this guy was a criminal and wouldn't have gone and like tried to fucking like, be the Punisher and shit, right? Wouldn't have tried to pretend to play vigilante for no fucking reason and not having any proof. You know what I mean? Maybe that wouldn't have happened if they had been taught the real history of racial inequality in this country, right? This is why it fucking matters. So we're seeing all over the country. Let's take a minute and read some. Shit, my hand kind of hurts. But we're at 12 o'clock. We usually go until 1. So let's take a minute, read some comments here. Mm. Plus, I gotta drink something because my throat is like dry as fuck. Let's see. Pony throat. Trust me, you can never have too much throat detail. Oh, well, thanks. Dynacat. Was it Candace Owens that completely messed up what the three-fifth compromise was? Was it? I don't know. What did she say? Let's take a look. Let's see. Candace Owens, three-fifths compromise. I can spell. Uh, I see PragerU. Why the three-fifths compromise was anti-slavery. Yeah, okay, that's bullshit. Is that Candace Owens that said that? Let me see here. I don't want to play the video. Okay, it's muted. Good. No, no, it's not Candace Owens, but it is James Madison Society. Okay, so they actually did get a black woman to say it though. Candace Owens is the Constitution racist. March 31st, 2019. I love when the Three Fritz clause and it not counting black people as a whole being a racist edition comes up. Oh yeah. Okay, so this is a thing from Candace Owens. She posted on Facebook. Oh, it's a video. Okay, yeah. So I guess she did say something. I will keep this for next time. Let me just bookmark this in my little politics folder because I do want to take some time. It looks like there's a video, but I don't want to like view a video right now in this stream. Maybe we'll check that out on Wednesday. Seems like we're doing a pretty good. Like I'm kind of liking the setup. Like Saturdays is more of an in-depth stream with more research, and then like Wednesdays is more of like a kind of watch a video and fuck around kind of stream. You know what I mean? Danicat, natives are not good slaves because they have a place to successfully to escape to. Yeah, I remember reading about that. How in the beginning they would like say the conquistadors and shit like that would try to keep like Native Americans as slaves, and they would tend to disappear. And it's sort of like partially, yeah, for that reason, because they basically knew the land. You know what I mean? So this was their area where they lived, and like they knew where to go to. So when they could escape, they had they had like a support system in place, right? Versus like slaves from Africa who were like basically taking over an entire freaking ocean. you know, don't know anybody, and it's like, well, yeah, you can escape, but what are you going to do? Live in the woods, right? In a continent that you have no clue about, and know anything, know about the native culture or anything like that. There were plenty of stories that I've heard though of escaped slaves doing things like joining Native American tribes and stuff like that, though. Right. So I do remember reading some stuff about that kind of thing, which is sort of like in New Orleans, there's a lot of like that sort of Creole culture is sort of a mix of like African and like Native American, religions and stuff like that. And so yeah, it's kind of fascinating, but still, yeah, I think I do remember reading a lot in that of exactly what you just said. Jeannie B, three fifths, not one half. Not two thirds, but three fifths. It's amazing we haven't chewed our own limbs off out of sheer stupidity. Yes. Thanks for joining, by the way. Good to see you, Jeannie B. Um, yeah, really, yeah, it's just an example. That's just one example of yes, the how the United States really, yes, did have, you know, as part of its founding, this sort of institutional racism built into it, you know. And yeah, it's really this sort of myth that conservatives like to just basically um, push onto the rest of this. That this is we were all free here and everybody has equal opportunity and all you got to do is work really hard, go to school, get good grades, and you too can be like fucking Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or fucking Henry Ford or some shit. And it's bullshit, and in reality there are people in the country who just have disadvantages from the moment they're born that other people don't have, you know. Like even right now, another good example, since we're talking about this kind of thing, kind of going off on a tangent, but it relates. Another good example, Joe Biden has pledged to have the next Supreme Court justice be a black woman, right? Because there's never been a black woman before, right? And this was actually a campaign promise that he made. And of course, the conservatives are losing their fucking minds over it. You had like Ted Cruz, for example, saying, and why? What's the line of attack? The line of attack is, well, she won't be qualified, right? Which kind of goes to show it's like, okay, she's a judge, all right. So whoever they're going to nominate is going to be a judge, right? They're not going to just nominate any fucking person. This is going to be someone for the Supreme Court. So, do you think they're not going to do their homework and just going to nominate anybody like just because they're black? You know, and then you see Amy Coney Barrett, right? Amy Coney Barrett apparently was only practicing law for 2 years before she became a Supreme Court justice. Like she apparently never like presided over a trial that actually like went to trial. You know what I mean? Like and you're just like, wow, so they chose this person who this extremely inexperienced person to be a Supreme Court justice for the rest of her life. Don't be wrong, she will be a Supreme Court justice now for like, 40 years and shit, right? And, if anybody's going to try to claim that Amy Coney Barrett wasn't put in there specifically along ideological lines, right? Specifically because of her stance, her anti like abortion stance, then I got a bridge to fucking sell you. So, you know, kind of just goes to the hypocrisy right there, man. Right? Anyway, so let's see. People are too reluctant to let go of that tasty privilege. Yes. Privilege is tasty. And when everybody gets privileges, the exact same privileges you do, it suddenly feels like oppression, doesn't it? That's what it is. Oh, well, it's not special if everybody fucking has it. Right. Okay, let's move on a little bit. So, we talked about the background of all this. Now I want to talk about some of the actual states and things that are being passed, right? Um, let's see here. Um, in Florida, right, there was a bill being pushed by Ron DeSantis called the Individual Freedom Bill. This is a bill that targets critical race theory, of course, um, and it says in part, the language of the bill says in part that it bans an individual by virtue of his sex or race does not bear responsibility for actions committed in the past by any other members of the same race or sex. An individual should not be made to feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any form of psychological distress on account of his or her race, right? So this has not actually been implemented into law just yet, right? But it has passed one of the committees, the Florida Senate Education Committee, along party lines, right? And like I said before, that language sounds like it should be something that's positive, right? Okay, yeah, individuals should not be made to feel discomfort, is what the text says. Now, the a quick reading of that would say, oh, okay, yeah, there won't be any thing taught in schools that will upset people or blah 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 blah, right? Well, that doesn't change the fact that teaching about things like slavery or lynching or you know sexual discrimination, right? Women's lib, for example, right? The sexual revolution, right? That kind of thing, or even something like, women's suffrage, voting rights, right? All of these things can be considered controversial, and all it takes is a student, and under the wording of this law, all it takes is a student basically saying, this is making me feel uncomfortable, because that's what the law says. Law says students should not be made to feel uncomfortable, right? And the idea is like, it sounds like it should be like, oh, well, we're not allowed to teach that one race is superior to the other. And so you could turn it around and be like, see, there won't be anybody teaching about, like white supremacism or whatever, right? But that's actually, not teaching that a race is superior to another. Teaching about whites, what about the negative aspects of white supremacism? Shouldn't we teach about that? Shouldn't we teach about things like, fascist movements in the United States, right? Like things like the America First movement in the 1940s, right? Or the silver shirts or things like that, or the white citizen councils in the 50s that would like, you know, um, that would basically stood against civil rights, right? Shouldn't we teach about that? Shouldn't we teach about the civil rights era and all that? This is all stuff that could make somebody uncomfortable, right? Shouldn't we teach about things like, say, the formation of the Ku Klux Klan, right? That's an important thing. Ku Klux Klan was formed in during Reconstruction, right? And they were basically just like white supremacist terrorists, you know, that murdered and raped people and killed politicians and fucking lynched black people continuously. Lynching lasted all the way until like the 40s and shit, right? Still occasionally happens now and then. It was a major fucking problem, like back then. It was a serious problem. There was I saw like a video once about how civil rights leaders in the 1940s were basically threatened to not support World War II if something didn't happen about lynching. And Eisenhower and FDR like made a deal with like civil rights leaders, basically saying, okay, you get on board with the war, and then after the war's over, things are going to be different. And then fucking they reneged on the deal. didn't pass any uh didn't pass any significant like legislation to address lynching, and that was one of the catalysts that started the civil rights movement in the 1950s. Right. See, this is shit that we need to, kids you should be learning that shit in high school, right? I shouldn't have to get that from a YouTube video like fucking 25 years later. All right, I should have learned about that when I was 16. Right? Seriously, like, you know, but this is the kind of subject that these laws will prevent. This is being pushed really hard by Ron DeSantis, right? So that text, right? An individual by should not be made to feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his or her race. Right. I heard that the other day in a YouTube video, right? And this was a video about um, basically book banning in Texas, right? And what's going on is that there was a Texas state representative, right, for the Texas Senate. So this is not a national guy, but the Senate in Texas, named Matt Krause, right, Republican, of course. And Matt Krause is sending around lists of books to different school districts saying, hey, do you have these books, right? And in his email, these were books that he basically says might make students feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of their race or sex. It's the exact same language of the bill that's in Florida, right? The exact same language of Florida's individual freedom bill that this guy is using in his emails, right? Trying to pressure school districts into getting rid of books that he doesn't like, right? You know, that makes my conspiracy theory mind kind of churn a little bit and say, see, it's not just a grassroots thing. It's not just conservative, concerned parents and stuff going before their school boards wanting to get rid of naughty books or whatever because they have the N word in them or something, right? We got to get rid of, Huckleberry Finn or whatever or some shit like that. No, no, it's a very, organized effort. You know, why would this guy in Texas be using the exact same language as a bill in Florida, right? It's because these people are fucking, it's an organized effort, you know? Somebody's behind pulling the strings, supplying the fucking, like, I mean, at the very least, this guy Tom Kraus is in touch with, like, the people who drafted that bill in Florida with Ron DeSantis and shit, right? But this is what's going around. So here's the actual link. Let me copy this and paste it in there so you guys can see that. This is the link of lists of the books that Matt Krause here thinks are naughty. And I want to open this up a little bit and kind of display this for you guys here, right? Let me turn on my laptop window. Plus, it gives my hand a minute to rest. Here's some of the books that Tom Krause thinks are, you know, making students feel discomfort or guilt or anguish or psychological distress because of their race. And if you look at it, it's basically just every single book that you can find that has to do with race or gender, right? Very first one, 2020, Black Lives Matter marches. Right off the fucking bat, very first one there, right? A couple more that jumped out to me. There were some here. Race and policing in modern America. Protesting police violence in modern America. Oh, there you go. That's a big one, right? Kind of get get rid of those George Floyd protesters. Race in the media in modern America. Racial justice in America. Topics for change, right? The girls I've been. That's probably has to do with gender, right? What is the Black Lives Matter movement? What is white privilege? Black Lives Matter, protesting racism. Every single thing that has to do with race in here, they all get, you know, pushed out, right? Let's see. There was another one. Some LGBTQ rights ones were in here, right? But you can kind of see where we're going with this. It's all like basically, here we go. The fight for LGBTQ rights, right? That's another one. V for Vendetta, right? If you've, V for Vendetta is actually the movie, right? Based on a graphic novel, and it's a very anti-authoritarian graphic novel. The story, it's all about government propaganda and freedom, and how it's sometimes you got to rise up and smash the oppressors and shit like that, you know. So here we go. The new Jim Crow, mass incarceration in the age of color blindness. Right. So you can kind of see, here, oh, gender equality, gender queer, right? It feels good to be yourself, a book about gender identity. I mean, Rainbow, first book of Pride. So basically anything having to do with race, anything having to do with gender, anything, and this is all the stuff that Matt Krause thinks will make kids feel psychological distress or miscomfort and wants to ban them, right? Let's get rid of this fucking horseshit. But anyway, there's the list down in the thing if you guys want to check it out. Let me put my window back where it was so that I can see what I'm doing, right? Pretty disturbing shit, right? You know? Now, why is he doing this? Well, this little worm, Matt Krause, is actually in a primary race right now, so this is most likely a stunt. Okay, it's not actually a law yet. They haven't actually banned any of these books. He just sent the letter, but kind of shows where his head is at. And let's say he actually does get elected. Is he going to follow through with this? Is he going to try to ban all these books? Right? That's a shitload of books there. I mean, you know, it kind of looks like right now he's just trying to out crazy his opponent because this is what conservative Republican politics are all about now. It's all about who's the most insane person, who can like be the most MAGA, right? Who's like it's conservative politics have gone so far off the fucking rails now they're basically talking about burning fucking books for crying out loud. Like, banning them and throwing people in fucking jail and shit. This is how bad it is. Being so when you talk about like, when I put in the title of my stream Maga Fascists, like I actually mean it, right? I mean it. This is fascism. That's what this is, right? Basically trying to gain control of the education system in this country. It's fucking fascism, right? Also in Texas, the reason why I don't have a lot of faith that Texas will be able to stop, like if this guy were to get elected, that it could actually turn into a problem and they actually could start burning fucking books and shit there, is because Texas has already passed a pretty restrictive CRT law, right? It was basically Texas House Bill 3979, which was expanded on in Texas Senate Bill 3. This is the bill that basically says that it was passed in reaction to critical race theory, right? And it prohibits teachers from any kind of discussion of controversial historical, social, or political issues, right? Things like all the stuff that we just said, things like slavery, things like the abolitionist movement, right? The Underground Railroad, the slavery in relation to the Civil War, stuff like that, Reconstruction, lynching, Native American genocide, right? Fucking Japanese internment camps. That's another one. That's something that it's controversial, right? Um, you know, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he was a controversial person. I guess they can't teach about him any fucking more, right? I mean, the Freedom Summer murders. You guys know that? It was basically when the fucking Ku Klux Klan murdered three um civil rights activists in like what was it? Fucking 1963, I think. Right? That's controversial. Can't teach about that, right? There was a story that I found that I want to share with you guys here, and it was let me see. Let me find it real quick. Okay, it was here we go. South Lake teacher tells teachers to balance the Holocaust. So this happened last October. I won't read this or anything, right? I'll just put a link to it down in the thing so you guys can look at that later. Basically, it was a phone call where a bunch of teachers were like, "Hey, this law just passed. There's lots of subjects we can't discuss. What happens when, for example, this is like it was like a Zoom call, right? Or something like that. I think was it a Zoom call? I don't know. It was something like that. And basically teachers were like, "Hey, what about like something like the Holocaust? How do we teach that?" And the direction they got back from the head administrator was you have to take a balanced approach. And then so the teacher says back, "Well, how the fuck do you like, paraphrasing here, obviously, right? She didn't use the F word, but, you know, how does one have a balanced approach to the Holocaust? What does a balanced approach to the Holocaust mean?" And the administrator was flustered and was like, "Hey, I'm right there with you. I'm sorry, but this is the law. Um, we don't have a choice." That was basically what the administrator said back. And this is because of this fucking law that passed that said that, you can't teach anything that's controversial. Well, how the fuck do you make the Holocaust not controversial? Especially when, there's like an entire segment of the fucking population which is making it controversial. Right? You got to remember the people that have a problem with this shit are the conservatives. They're the ones that have a problem with teaching things like the Holocaust, with teaching things like the history of slavery. You know, with the civil rights movement, it wouldn't be controversial to anybody else because we're not flaming fucking bigots that think that anything, that this is like an attack on our personal fucking like identity, you know, right? But people like fucking Tom Cotton and Matt Krause do, right? Because they politicized all of this shit, you know. And it's basically a good example of how racism is built into the Republican identity nowadays, where you can't even like teach about the slaughter, the industrialized slaughter of human beings based on their race. You can't even like teach about that anymore. That suddenly becomes controversial. Just learning about that in a school, you know, let that shit sink in. I really can't understand how anybody can vote Republican nowadays and then claim to not be racist. Just own it. If you're gonna, own your fucking racism, then we can have a discussion, you know, and basically our discussion will involve everybody fucking ostracizing your dumbass. That's why they don't do it. Anyway, kind of bullshit. So yeah, Texas is all fucked up, right? Because how do the teachers get around this, right? How do you teach these subjects like the Holocaust without it being controversial, right? The solution is you don't teach it. And that's the entire point of these laws in the first place is to just not teach this stuff, right? Um, Another one, what do we got here? There is also a push from Texas to ban not just books in school libraries, but also in public libraries. This just came out yesterday. There's the link to that one. Same kind of thing, mayors of a couple of small towns in Texas are doing reviews. Basically, is summing up that article that I'm not going to open that I just posted in the chat. There are mayors in small towns in Texas who are doing reviews of books in public libraries in particular the children's section to make sure that there's no books that will offend the poor little fifis of the little children, you know. And it's yeah, see that's the other thing. It starts with the schools, right? It starts with the schools. It starts with the children because everybody wants to defend the children, right? Oh, that's the thing that all adults have an instinct to defend children, right? If you're like a normal, ordinary, functioning adult with like a healthy, like, sense of morality, then you want to defend children. It's like a fucking involuntary like instinct, evolution kind of thing. Defend the kids. So whenever you see something like this is what they always do. They always frame it under this like veneer that we're doing this to protect the children, right? I mean, look at QAnon for crying out loud. God, sorry, I put my coat on. It's fucking cold in here. The whole motivation from QAnon and stuff like that is to protect children from what they think is a cabal of blood drinking, baby raping Satanists. And this is what they're taught, this is why they go through all the shit and they do the protests and all that crap. Is because we're trying to save the children from the fucking Satanists, you know? And it's really kind of insidious, man. It's insidious how badly these people are being fucking like manipulated. There was a story that came out a little while ago, a graphic novel called Mouse. Have you guys heard of this? Mouse is actually written. It's an account of the Holocaust by the author. His name is I got it written here. Art Spiegelman, right? I actually do own this graphic novel too. My sister gave it to me like decades ago, and admittedly, I haven't actually read the entire thing because it's kind of long. But the part that I did read, it's actually not for kids. Mouse. It's not. I mean, it's not like a comic book like any other comic book that you would get. You know what I mean? It's very much a mature adult story. There's not like superheroes and shit in it, right? It's more like it's like Persepolis. You ever read Persepolis? Same kind of deal, you know. Um, and it's depicts the Jewish victims of the Holocaust as mice and the Nazis as cats. And the story is about how his father basically escaped, the Holocaust and survived through it. And his father and mother were actually inmates at Auschwitz, and they managed to escape. His mother eventually committed suicide years later, right? So lots of tragedy going on here. And Mouse is like an award-winning graphic novel that everybody should read. In fact, I should take my own advice and read it. I've got a copy of it back here that has just been sitting on my shelf for 20 years. I think I'm going to read it. But anyway, yeah. So this has been banned from in Tennessee, in McMinn County, Tennessee. The school board there voted to remove this because there's some naughty language in it. And there's also one panel where like a female mouse is like naked because she's like basically being like fucking raped, right? Or exploited sexually. I think I haven't actually read that part, so I can't say. But you know, um, I guess yeah, definitely fucking not for not a superhero kind of thing, right? It's not something that was like it's very much a mature sort of actual poignant take, right? But it is been banned from this school board, right? Which is kind of bullshit. In the minutes of the meeting, Mr. Spiegelman, after he read it, the minutes of the meeting, he said that he got the impression that the board members were asking, "Why can't we teach a nicer Holocaust?" That was his quote, right? How the fuck do you teach the Holocaust in a nice way, right? See, I never myself understood parents who sheltered their children like that, right? Now you can, how do you teach the Holocaust to children, right? And how do you do it in a way that won't give them nightmares, but will instead impress upon them the reality of what actually happened? Because you don't want to whitewash something like the Holocaust, right? You want them to understand that it was horrible and, you know, millions of people died. And the reason why you need to teach your children about stuff like the Holocaust is so that they'll be informed when shit like that starts to happen again, they'll stand up against it. That's why it's important to teach your children about stuff like this, right? Well, to what better way to teach your children in a way without traumatizing them? What better way to do it than through a graphic novel, right? I mean, it's black and white drawings, line drawings, so it's not like there's blood in it and like photographs of people getting their brains blown out and piles of dead bodies, shit like that, right? It's in a medium that children can understand, Every kid reads comic books, even kids who aren't into comic books when they're small kids, they read comics. Everybody does, right? I mean, come on, right? You know, it's in a medium they can understand easily, written with language that they can understand in a way that will draw their interest, right? And in a way that, so that they'll easily understand. And then they read that, oh, this was a true story, except they actually weren't really mice and they weren't really cats, but this is what actually happened, right? Seems like kind of the perfect way to me to teach something like the Holocaust, right? Doesn't it? Nope, not according to McMinn County, Tennessee, because once again, it's not actually about the subject, it's about control of the education system, right? Kind of bullshit. Other schools are banning books all over the place. This happened in Virginia as well, in a place called Spotsylvania County. Spotsylvania, Vania. This is wow. This is like a weird ass like. It's this here. That's what it is. Spotsylvania. Like okay, that's kind of strange. County in Virginia. They also voted unanimously last year to remove books that they call sexually explicit. Explicit. So, sorry, I got to drink something. Also happened in Pennsylvania in York County. Books that were banned included books that had perspectives of gay, black, and Latino children. Right. That was actually overturned. So that gives me a little bit of hope. A bunch of schools and educators got together and protested that, and they got that ban overturned in Pennsylvania, so that's good. Here's something that you guys might like. Um, Pastor Greg Locke. You ever heard of this guy? Here's another link. Let me put this down here for you. Pastor Greg Locke has taken it one step extra farther in Tennessee and has decided to have himself a good old-fashioned book burning. So Greg Locke is kind of insane. He's sort of like he's like a QAnon guy, one of these people that like was basically saying that Donald Trump was gonna retake back the presidency and shit. Never happened. He's also a praised the Proud Boys at one point. Actually, he praised the Proud Boys at a rally one day before January 6th. Right? So maybe that was just bad timing on his part, but somehow I don't think so. He's also a COVID denier, has said that told people in his flock not to get vaccinated. So there you go, right? Thinks he's an anti-vax kind of person. Um, he is also a member of the what's called the Black Robe Regiment, which is basically a group of churches who are like part of the Christian nationalism and have basically pledged to, when the time comes, attack the United States, like with guns and violence and shit. This is like he's basically pledged that yeah, when the fucking Civil War happens, he's picked a side already, you know. So little dangerous this guy, right? You know, not very good for your health either. Basically telling people not to get vaccinated, one step below a fucking militia leader and shit. And is also incredibly popular. His Facebook page has 2.3 million followers on it. Why the fuck this guy has not been banned off Facebook yet, I don't know. But there you go. So he just had himself a good old-fashioned book burning. If you guys want to check that link out, he's burning shit like Harry Potter and Twilight and stuff, saying it's like satanic, which is bullshit. But who wants to bet that lots of books about race and gender will also be included on that pile, right? I mean, there you go, folks. Um, Oklahoma has gone one step further than just banning books in schools and stuff like that. There's a Republican representative from the Oklahoma State Senate named Rob Standridge, Senator Rob Standridge. He has proposed what's called the Students' Religious Belief Protection Act. Okay. And so this is not a law yet. This has just been proposed. But here's what this act is. Okay. It says that parents can demand the removal of any book with perceived anti religious content from school. So if you're a parent and you don't like this book because it teaches something against your religion, then you have then under this law, if it ever gets passed, you will have the ability to unilaterally decide that nobody else gets to read this book. Banned, gone, out of the library. I don't like it. What kind of books could possibly offend religious people? Say books on evolution, hmm? you know, LGBT issues, the Big Bang, for example, things, Charles Darwin, that kind of thing, right? Origin of the species. I guess that won't be allowed in schools anymore. Um, Things that have to do that say that the Earth is like, round, right? Because people believe that. People believe the Earth is flat, right? That flat Earth thing mainly comes from religious people, right? This whole, maybe I was thinking of doing a stream on flat earthers too, and because they have a pretty funny, like hilarious fucking history as well. But that's where that mainly comes from. Most of the flat earth people are like religious nuts who use evidence in the Bible, evidence being like passages and shit that were written like 2,000 years ago that have no basis in fucking reality. But, they claim that this is evidence that the Bible says the earth is flat or whatever, and that the sky is really an upside down bowl called the filament, and that stars are really angels. Because this is what it actually says in the Bible. It actually says stars are angels, and that it actually says that in Revelation, a third of the stars will fall out of the sky and hit the earth, which is impossible if stars are actually, you know, burning balls of gas, which are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of light years away, right? There's no possible way they will actually fall and hit the earth. Anyway, you know, what about books that acknowledge that other faiths and religions exist? Say a book about, you know, Buddhism, the origins of Buddhism, a book about the history of Islam, something like that, book about Native American religions or that kind of thing. You know, some conservative Christian wacko might think that that is a little bit offensive and demand those books get put away, right? Teachers under this law who refuse to go along with it can be sued. Minimum of $10,000 per incident per student. So that means that if they have the audacity to teach, like, let's say about the scope monkey trial or something, or to teach evolution, right? Or to teach about cosmic background radiation, right? Or anything like that. If they have the audacity to teach about this stuff, then every student in their room can sue them for $10,000, right? And according to the law, it has to come from the teacher's personal funds. It can't be supplied by any outside organization, right? So no ACLU coming in and paying it for them, right? No GoFundMe's, right? Basically, it's the teacher's fucked. And if the teacher doesn't go for it, they get fired. Bam. So that way, because you're supposed to have tenure and stuff when you're a teacher. It's supposed to be very difficult to fire someone who's a teacher, right? So, nope. I guess not if you teach evolution. Now you just get canned immediately. This is what is actually going on in Oklahoma. This is how crazy the right wing is in this country, right? That they've and of course, in any functioning democracy, this shit would get laughed out of court, right? I would have said 10 years ago, like if I would have seen this story and the news, I'd be laughing my ass off right now telling it to you, right? Saying that this wouldn't survive 5 minutes in the court, right? Now we have a conservative Supreme Court We have a conservative Supreme Court that allowed a similar law like this in Texas that has to do with abortion to stand, right? Repeatedly. The Supreme Court had like three chances to knock down this law. You know, the sue abortion providers law in Texas, right? They had three chances to stop that law from one from going into effect, and then also a chance to like stop it while it's going through the courts, and they allowed it to stand because of there's a conservative majority because of like Amy Coney Barrett and fucking Brett Kavanaugh, right? They allowed that to go. So it's like, well, if they're gonna allow it, if they're gonna allow a law like this where you can sue people for providing abortions, why would they not allow a law where you can sue teachers, right? I mean, I don't have that faith anymore. I don't have the faith that our country can pull itself out of this hole, this fascist fucking black hole that we're being sucked into just on the power of our institutions alone. It's going to take a movement, right? It's going to take a movement not just in the streets, right? Yes, people have to go out and protest in the streets, but that's not it. That's not the only way to stop it. It's going to take a political movement. We're going to have to vote. We're going to have to register people to vote, right? It's going to take a big effort. Register people to vote. Get out there, because they're also, the conservatives and the Republicans and shit are doing everything they can to fucking curtail voting rights in these same states, in states like Alabama and Texas, right? And, Georgia, shit like that, doing everything they can to maintain political power. And we're going to have to organize like crazy. Donate your time and your money. Get people out there. Get people to the polls, right? Because that's ultimately going to be the only way to stop this, right? You can protest all the fuck you want. Protesting doesn't change laws. Protesting will not get people like Amy Coney Barrett off the Supreme Court. You know, you know what will? Getting a progressive, liberal progressive majority in both houses of Congress and a progressive president, right? Or even a president who pays lip service to being progressive. They don't even have to really be progressive. They just have to be pressured by progressives into doing something. That's what's going to change shit in this. That or like a fucking revolution, a violent overthrow of the country, which nobody really wants, right? I don't want that. I don't know. Some people on the left actually do want that, but I don't, right? So this is what it's going to take because, the conservatives, the Republicans, they're fucking doing their shit, right? They're making their moves, right? And they're fucking like not because they have a shitload of money behind them supplied by people, from like mega churches and corporations and shit. You know, the only way that we can compete with that is through people power, right? There aren't giant mega corporations funding progressive causes or even liberal causes. No, not really. The George Soroses and shit like that. That's not really a thing. That doesn't really exist, right? We don't. There is no equivalent of the Koch brothers on the side of the liberal side, on the progressive side. Not really, right? Our money, our funding comes from small donations, right? And that's what we've got to do. We've got to fucking like, organize, donate, right? And fucking actually like, donate your time. It's not always just money either. I'm thinking of like this next election of like actually volunteering and doing some phone banking shit like that, right? You know, because this is what I can do. And it's if it's a small thing. Some people can only give money, some people can only donate their time. That's great. If we all do a little bit, this is what we got to do in order to fight back against shit like this, right? Anyway, it's kind of fucking sad. It basically all this really is it's an extension of cultural Marxism conspiracy theory, right? Which is a subject for another video. Maybe I did one years ago about cultural Marxism, but it might be a good thing to revisit. Let's read some comments here. Let me zoom out, plus my hand hurts and I got to go to the bathroom. So let's read some comments and then we'll end it at 1 o'clock. We got about 10 minutes. I think I can hold it for 10 minutes. What do we got here? We made some pretty good progress, I think, today. We might actually finish this in the next uh, I was about to say sprint in the next video. Sorry, that's my work. Sprints and shit. Um, we might actually finish this in the next video and start coloring. So we already read a bunch of the comments, but let's see. What do we got here? Pony Throat. Opinion on My Little Pony Vor. Um, whatever you're into, man. I'm not going to say anything about anybody's fetish, right? Because, that's your own thing, right? You like cartoon horses eating you and stuff. That's totally your thing. I'm not gonna like comment or disparage anybody. If you guys knew half of the shit I masturbate to, you probably wouldn't watch me anymore. Um, let's see, Pony Throat. Wow, I misread that as mega fascist the whole time. Oh yeah, no, I meant MAGA fascist for sure. Pony Throat. Thoughts on burning books that are incredibly racist, like Mein Kampf, The Bell Curve, or anything Marx wrote? Um, I don't think those should be burned either. I really don't. Now books like that, I think, are inappropriate for like a child, grade school audience. But they should be allowed, I think, in high school, right? Because kids should be allowed to do reports on those, right? Um, maybe you sort of restrict, in one way or another. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a balancing act. You don't want children to like read those things and admire them. You know what I mean? But I don't really believe that's the thing. I believe if our education system is robust enough, then it should be capable of teaching that these are bad things. But that doesn't mean that you burn them. That doesn't mean that you restrict them like that. Like, I mean, I guess the argument could be made to not have them in school libraries, right? But I would say in like a normal public library, no, they should be there. They should be allowed. You should be able to read Mein Kampf if you want to. You should be able to read Karl Marx if you want to, or whatever, the Turner Diaries, you know, that kind of thing. So no, I don't believe that they should be destroyed. But I could understand though. I can understand how people would not want them to be in like say a high school library. You know, maybe an alternative to that would be to actually have that to, a class on why stuff like that is wrong. Teach about the bell curve and why it's bullshit. That might be like a good alternative. You know what I mean? So I don't know. That's a good question, man. Really good question. Adversary fandom. Will somebody please think of the children? Yeah, right. Pony Throat. Mouse was banned by a leftist school for containing naughty words. The torch has been passed, and Hitler is smiling in his grave. Was it a leftist school? Really? I don't know about that. I'll have to look that up. I was under the impression that it was banned by conservatives, but I will do further research. Um, I mean that admittedly just happened like a couple of days ago. At least the story broke a couple days ago, so I could be totally wrong there. Let's see. Dynacat loves me. I am opposed to all graphic novels as a matter of literary principle. So there's one Dynacat. If you're ever interested, there's one called Persepolis, which is a story about a girl growing up in Iran, which is actually very like I would say that one borders on being actual literature, you know. And supposedly Mouse is supposed to be really good too. I mean, like I said, I haven't read the entire thing, but it's like award-winning stuff. So you know, I don't know. If you ever want to give it a chance, I'd recommend those two. Um, but yeah, usually graphic novels are just usually just comic books. Like, I mean, of course, I'm like a big time comic book collector, so I'm a little biased. Plenty Throat. Mouse was also the name of the biggest tank in history. 188 tons of poor decisions. Yeah, huh? Plenty Throat. Fun fact: the majority of Buddhists are also atheists. Correct. Correct. They are. Buddhism is compatible with atheism. This is definitely correct. There is, of course, also a large portion of Buddhists who actually believe in a mythology, including gods and an afterlife and stuff like that too. So, um, lots of different types of forms of Buddhism, right? Adversary Fandon, do you plan to leave the U.S. when things go to deeper shit? I think the only reason I would leave the United States is if there were a total takeover, you know, like a total fascist takeover and people were being carted off in train cars. Because the reason why is because I'm not, I have like a family and like responsibilities now. If I were young, like 20, and didn't really, have responsibility to anybody, then I would stay and fight. I would become a freedom fighter and probably get murdered in the streets like a dog, but I would want to stay back and join the underground resistance or whatever. But I don't know. I don't know if I'm physically like. I mean, I guess yeah. When people are pushed, you do what you got to do. But my first instinct would be to flee to Canada. That would be my first instinct. I'd want to protect my wife and my family. It would be my first. If I didn't have those attachments, then yes, I would want to. I would want to go out and fight. you know. So I don't know. Maybe if my whole family dies in a fucking in a fucking drone strike, God forbid, or something like that, I might change my mind. I might go get an AR-15 and join the resistance. Um, Fluttershy is at her best when she is in heat. Lol. uh, okay. um. Anyway, timestamp for previous comment reading. I was out of stream. Um, Previous comment reading was at around halfway through, right around an hour in. We read half of the comments. So, Pony Throat, money is the jealous god of Israel. Karl Marx. Yeah. I mean, like I said, these things can be taught in a way I think that shows their flaws. You know what I mean? I think it's important that kids should learn about, for example, things like Karl Marx and the history of communism. They should learn about the history of fascism, and they should learn about the history of white supremacism, and especially when it comes to in relation to American history, they should learn these things, and they should learn them. They can be taught in such a way that it doesn't encourage them to become followers of these things. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, guys, thank you all so much. I got to get going because I'm about to pee in my pants if I don't like go take a leak. And we are at 2 hours anyway, so I'll go ahead and end it. Let me just open up my ending stuff here. Thank you all so much for joining. I really appreciate it. I hope that you got a little bit out of this stream today. Where's my OBS studio? Oh, there it is. All right. Well, let me turn on my laptop window. And if you guys like what I do and you want to, uh, actually, I need to move that over here. If you want to see more of my work, you can check me out on DeviantArt. This is my DeviantArt site where I put up more of my artwork and stuff like that. So I will put that down in the chat for y'all. Let me move this over here. Please check me out there. Right. If you want to see more of my webcomic, it is at hawanja.com. You can check that out there as well. If you want to give me some money and support the channel, I got an SD shop here. And, I sell print stuff like that. And if you want to see me talk about like video games and toys and stuff, then I have another YouTube channel called UCD Videos. And there you go. So, guys, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you all coming and hanging out with me today. Um, Thank you all so much. Thank you, Pony Throat. Thank you, Adversary Fandon. Thank you, Jeannie B. Great to hear from and everybody else who joined today. I got to get going. So, you guys have a good rest of your day. Adios.